When a racist woman slapped a black royal guard, she thought she could humiliate him and walk away. But what unfolded next stunned the crowd and left her facing a reality she never saw coming. This is a powerful story of respect, justice, and a response that turned hate into shame. Stay till the end to see how it all played out. The day started like any other at Buckingham Palace. Tourists milled about, cameras clicking as the stoic royal guards stood at attention, their uniforms pristine and their faces unwavering. Among the sea of visitors, one woman stood out, not because of her appearance but because of her demeanor. She was visibly agitated, muttering under her breath as she weaved through the crowd. A sharp tone cut through the hum of chatter, and a few people nearby turned to look at her. The woman, who appeared to be in her late 40s, carried herself with an air of superiority. Her pointed remarks about tradition being overrated and why anyone would take these guards seriously didn't go unnoticed. As she walked closer to one of the guards, a tall black man standing firm in his red tunic and bearskin hat, her scornful gaze lingered on him a moment too long. With a smirk, she stepped closer, testing the boundaries of the guard's silence. She snapped her fingers inches from his face. "What are you even here for?" she sneered. The tourists around her gasped softly, a few pulling out their phones to record the brewing tension. But the guard didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Her frustration grew. "You just stand there like a statue? Is that it?" she said louder, now addressing the crowd as much as the guard. Her voice was dripping with entitlement, her disdain for the situation palpable. The guard remained resolute, his disciplined calm only fueling her anger. Then it happened. With a shocking speed that made the crowd collectively gasp, the woman raised her hand and struck the guard across the face. The sharp crack of the slap echoed in the courtyard. The guard's head turned slightly from the impact, but his composure remained intact. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The woman stood there, her hand still in mid-air, as if realizing the enormity of what she'd just done. The crowd was silent, their disbelief hanging heavy in the air. All eyes were on the guard, whose face was a portrait of restraint. His jaw tightened slightly, but his gaze remained forward, his posture unwavering. The woman's smirk faltered. The reality of her actions began to settle in, but it wasn't regret. At least, not yet. She turned to the onlookers, some of whom were already murmuring in shock. "What? He didn't do anything. He's just standing there," she exclaimed, as if trying to justify her actions. But the energy in the crowd had shifted. Where there had been passive curiosity before, there was now outrage and disgust. A few people shouted at her, telling her to leave or expressing their anger at her blatant disrespect. And yet the guard did nothing. He stood still, a testament to his training and professionalism. But his silence wasn't one of defeat. It was a silence that carried weight, dignity, and an unspoken message that words could never convey. As the woman's confidence began to waver, one young boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's hand. "Why did she hit him, Mom?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and sadness. His mother knelt down, struggling to find the words to explain what they had just witnessed. The woman glanced back at the guard, her frustration now giving way to unease, the calm in his eyes, the unwavering strength in his posture. It was as if her slap had only revealed her own weakness. But this was only the beginning. What would unfold in the minutes and hours to come would not only expose the depth of her actions, but also show the power of quiet resilience in the face of blatant racism. The murmur in the crowd grew louder as more people gathered, their curiosity turning to disbelief and anger. Several tourists were now recording the scene on their phones, capturing the stark contrast between the woman's aggression and the guard's unwavering calm. One man stepped forward, his voice firm. "You can't just slap someone like that. What's wrong with you?" His words seemed to reverberate through the growing audience, drawing nods of agreement. The woman, still flushed from her outburst, turned to face him. "Oh, give me a break," she snapped, trying to regain her composure. "He's a guard, isn't he? It's his job to stand there and take it." Her words sent a ripple of disgust through the crowd. A middle-aged woman in sunglasses crossed her arms. "No, it's not his job to take abuse from someone like you. Who do you think you are?" she said, her voice sharp with indignation. But the woman doubled down, raising her voice. "He's just standing there doing nothing. If they're going to dress them up like that, they should at least act useful." Her eyes darted back to the guard, searching for any flicker of reaction, but his stillness only magnified the ugliness of her words. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly man stepped forward, his cane tapping against the stone courtyard as he moved. His voice, though soft, carried a weight that demanded attention. "Do you even understand the meaning of this uniform?" he asked, pointing to the guard. "This man stands here as a symbol of discipline, honor, and service, not for your entertainment." The woman faltered, her bravado dimming under the weight of his words. The old man's gaze bore into her, unwavering. "You've disrespected more than just this man. You've disrespected what he represents." For a moment, the woman looked as though she might argue, but the murmurs of agreement from the crowd silenced her. She glanced around, realizing that she was no longer in control of the situation. The stares of judgment, the quiet condemnation from strangers, all of it began to close in on her. Meanwhile, the Black Royal Guard remained still, his presence commanding respect without uttering a single word. His silence, more powerful than any argument, hung in the air. A young woman near the front of the crowd turned her phone to the guard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know how you stayed so calm after what she did. You're amazing." Her words were meant for the guard, but they seemed to cut through the woman's bravado like a knife. The woman's unease deepened. For the first time, she seemed to notice the phones pointed at her, recording every detail. The weight of public scrutiny began to sink in. She fumbled with her words, trying to defend herself. I didn't mean it like that. It was just a reaction," she stammered, but her excuse fell flat. Someone in the crowd called out, "No one forced you to slap him. That was all you." The woman's cheeks burned red, but instead of apologizing, she turned toward the exit, muttering under her breath. She tried to push her way through the crowd, but it was clear her moment of control had slipped away entirely. As she retreated, the crowd's focus shifted back to the guard. A child's voice rang out again, filled with awe. "He didn't even move," the boy said, his wide eyes locked on the guard. His mother smiled softly, kneeling beside him. "That's what strength looks like," she said. The crowd began to clap, not for the woman's exit, but for the guard who had endured such blatant disrespect with quiet dignity. A few people approached him, offering words of support and admiration, though he remained stoic, his expression unchanged. One man in a business suit leaned in and said quietly, "You've got more self-control than most people I know. Thank you for setting an example." But the guard's silence wasn't just discipline, it was something deeper. It spoke to years of experience, of understanding the weight of his role, and of knowing that actions often speak louder than words. As the crowd began to disperse, there was a shared sense that they had witnessed something much larger than a single moment of racism. The dignity of the guard had turned an act of hate into a lesson for everyone present. But for the woman who delivered the slap, the consequences of her actions were far from over. She might have left the scene, but the impact of what she had done, and the way the world would respond, was just beginning to unfold. Hours after the incident, the video of the slap began to spread like wildfire across social media. Recorded from multiple angles by onlookers, the footage captured every moment: the woman's arrogance, the sharp slap, and the Black Royal Guard's dignified silence in the face of blatant racism. Comments poured in as the video circulated, igniting conversations worldwide. Some expressed shock and anger at the woman's actions. How could someone be so hateful? This guard deserves a medal for his composure. This is the clearest example of racism and entitlement I've ever seen. Others praised the guard for his strength and professionalism. Many noted how his silence spoke louder than words ever could. The guard's calmness is the ultimate response. What an incredible example of grace under pressure. He didn't just stand still, he stood tall. This is what dignity looks like in the face of ignorance. Meanwhile, the woman's identity didn't remain hidden for long. Within hours, internet sleuths uncovered her name and occupation, linking her to a mid-level corporate job at a prestigious firm. Screenshots of her LinkedIn profile and past public appearances were plastered all over the internet. The hashtag #God deserves respect trended, with calls for accountability growing louder by the minute. At first, the woman dismissed the backlash. In a hastily written post on her personal social media account, she called the incident overblown and claimed the guard intimidated her with his silence. But her words only fanned the flames. Comments flooded her page, calling her out for deflecting blame and refusing to apologize. Her employer, too, was dragged into the firestorm. The company released a public statement condemning her actions and promising a full review of her conduct. Back at Buckingham Palace, the Black Royal Guard's day continued as usual, stoic, disciplined and focused. Yet even among his fellow guards, there was a quiet admiration for how he had handled the incident. One of them, a veteran who had served for over a decade, approached him during a break. "You've shown more restraint than most men would, especially under that kind of pressure," the older guard said. The guard, who had been silent all day, finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "She wanted to humiliate me, but all she did was show who she really is. My job isn't to respond to hate, it's to stand for something bigger than myself." His words reflected the ethos of his role, a reminder that his uniform symbolized far more than ceremony. Back on social media, the narrative took an unexpected turn. A prominent public figure, a black activist and historian, shared the video with a powerful caption. "This is not just about one slap or one woman. This is about a history of racism that some people still feel entitled to act out. But look at this guard. Look at his strength. He didn't just take the slap. He showed the world what it means to stand tall against hate." The post went viral, sparking a global discussion about racism, entitlement, and the resilience of those who face it. News outlets picked up the story, interviewing witnesses who described the incident in vivid detail. The young boy who had asked his mother about the slap became a symbol of innocence, confronting hatred, his question echoing in headlines. "Why did she hit him, Mom?" The woman, now overwhelmed by public scrutiny, attempted a second statement, this time an apology. But it was too late. The damage was done. In her video, she appeared defensive, her words hollow. "I let my emotions get the best of me," she said, avoiding direct accountability. The public wasn't convinced. "Where's the acknowledgement of racism?" one comment read. "She's sorry she got caught, not for what she did," said another. Meanwhile, support for the guard grew exponentially. Messages of admiration and solidarity poured in from around the world. Schools, communities, and organizations used the video as a teaching tool, highlighting the power of self-restraint and the importance of addressing racism head-on. At Buckingham Palace, the guard was called into a private meeting with his commanding officer. Sitting across the desk, the officer spoke with genuine respect. "You've become a symbol of dignity in ways none of us could have expected. People are looking to you as an example, not just here but everywhere." The guard listened quietly, his expression steady. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition. His actions had come from a place of deep discipline and principle. Yet, he understood the importance of the moment. "I didn't do anything special," he replied after a pause. "I just refused to let her hate define me." As the days passed, the incident became more than just a viral moment. It sparked a global reckoning. Conversations about racism, privilege, and respect echoed across social media platforms, classrooms, and workplaces. The Black Royal Guard, though he had returned to his duties without fanfare, had become an unintended symbol of resilience. Back at Buckingham Palace, tourists now flocked not just to see the changing of the guard, but to catch a glimpse of him. Many approached with quiet words of admiration or notes of thanks, slipping them discreetly into the hands of his fellow guards. One day, a small group of children, led by a teacher, stood at the barricades, their wide eyes fixed on the stoic figure. "Excuse me, sir," the teacher said softly, addressing a nearby palace attendant. "My students have been learning about kindness and courage, and they wanted to say thank you to the guard for showing us what that looks like." The attendant relayed the message, and though the guard couldn't respond, his slight nod and a barely perceptible smile were enough to bring warmth to the group. Meanwhile, the woman who slapped him faced a very different reality. Her attempts to move past the incident were met with resistance. The internet had a long memory, and her name had become synonymous with entitlement and racism. Despite issuing a formal written apology and stepping down from her job, the public's response remained harsh. But the guard's story was no longer about her. A week after the slap, the guard was invited to speak at a private event hosted by a prominent anti-racism organization. Though hesitant at first, he eventually agreed, understanding the importance of sharing his perspective. The room was filled with educators, activists, and community leaders eager to hear his thoughts. Standing at the podium, the guard spoke plainly, his words reflecting the same quiet strength he had shown that day. "People have called me a symbol of strength, but I don't see it that way," he began, his voice steady. "What I did wasn't extraordinary. I just stood my ground. I didn't let someone else's hate take away my dignity or my purpose." He paused, scanning the room. Racism is loud. It's in your face. It demands a reaction. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let it win. That day I wasn't standing there for myself. I was standing for everyone who's ever been disrespected, underestimated, or targeted because of their skin color. The audience sat in silence, his words sinking in. "Racism isn't just in the big moments like that slap," he continued. "It's in the smaller moments too, the assumptions, the jokes, the things people let slide. We all have a responsibility to confront it, not just when it's obvious, but every time it happens." As he stepped down from the podium, the room erupted into applause. The guard, ever humble, simply nodded in acknowledgement before returning to his seat. Back at the palace, life slowly returned to normal, but the world around the guard had changed. The incident had sparked not just outrage but reflection. Schools added lessons on respect and cultural understanding. Workplaces hosted discussions on racism and accountability, and families talked openly about the importance of standing against hate. For the guard, the moment became a reminder of why he chose his role in the first place. As he stood in his ceremonial uniform each day, he wasn't just a guard. He was a symbol of integrity, respect, and unyielding strength. The woman's slap had been an attempt to demean, but it had achieved the opposite. Her hate had been met with dignity, and her act of racism had been turned into a lesson for the world to see. In the end, it wasn't just about a slap. It was about the power of grace, the importance of standing tall, and the enduring truth that dignity will always triumph over hate.